Good morning. I want to thank everybody for being on the phone and on the webinar and participating this morning. I really welcome you to the Idaho edition of our state webinars exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released report, Farms Under Threat, the State of the States. I'm Shawn Shepard Davis, AFT's Director of Development and Strategic Engagement. And actually, I'm coming to you from my home office in Nampa, Idaho. So I'm an Idahoan and a very proud one. And I'm extremely proud to be a part of both the AFT family and Idaho. I'm married into a big ranching family here. And one of the reasons I'm so excited to share this with everybody this morning is I see every day why this report is so very important. Anywhere we drive in the state of Idaho, we see the changes and the differences in land use. And like all of you, I'm excited to learn more about what's happening in Idaho. So it's my pleasure to introduce two of our outstanding colleagues who are going to be leading this, Chris Coffin and Addie Candide. So I'm going to turn it over to them and say, thanks, Idaho, for turning out this morning.
Great. Thank you so much, Shawn, and we're so happy to have you on with us. Before we get started, let me run through some logistics to help make this a good experience for everyone. You've all been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do it by looking at the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. There's an orange arrow at the top of that panel that allows the panel to shrink and reopen it, so keep it open. And then you'll see a question section of the control panel. You can undock it by hitting that little square and it'll pop it out, and then you can type in your question. We will allow plenty of time for a Q&A period at a couple of points along the webinar. We are also recording the webinar and we'll send a link to the recording back out to everybody who registered. And please feel free to share this recording with others. So let me now introduce myself. I am Chris Coffin. I am American Farmland Trust Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me, along with Shawn, is Addie Candide, AFT's Pacific Northwest Director. Addie is based in Bellingham, Washington, and divides her time between Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We are an agricultural land trust and we hold easements around the country, but that is only one piece of our mission. We believe that it's not farmland without farmers. So we focus on the viability of farming and ranching as well. We are increasingly focused on programming around land access and farm and ranch transfer and succession. We're also focused on the vital role farmers and ranchers are already playing and can play in mitigating climate change. Research is central to our work, as is state and federal policy development and advocacy. So with that, let me turn it over to Addie.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks to all of you for participating today. I wanted to acknowledge that we're being joined today by a number of our valued partners in Idaho, and these include representatives from Idaho Department of Agriculture, the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Idaho Farm Bureau, the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, Sun Valley Institute, Boise State University, and many, many local land trusts and local governments. I think as we're going to learn more about today, farmland loss is a complex and multifaceted issue, and it's going to take a concerted and very collaborative effort to respond effectively in Idaho. So we're really glad that such a diverse group of stakeholders was able to be part of the conversation today.
Great, thank you. So let's now dig into the findings from Farms Under Threat. We're focusing today on the State of the States report, which is the second in our research series. It paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach. It includes advanced spatial mapping to identify threats to agricultural land and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We are using this report to help raise public awareness about agricultural land loss, to inform state and federal policy, and I would add local in many places, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection and to save land from further loss. What I'm going to do now is switch to the interactive website that we have created for this project. And I hope that you all will find this a useful tool. It is something that we hope everybody will spend time with because there's lots of data that can be found through this website. So let me start with this tab over here that's reports and data. You will see all the things that you can read more about, many of the sort of what's the data that went behind this, what is the scorecard and the score sheets, and where you see geospatial data layers. That is a way that if you are interested in getting any of these data layers for your work, say as a planner or a land trust or the State Department of Agriculture, you are welcome to, you will find a form there to fill out and send in if you would like us to send the data layers. So from here, you would, if you're interested in Idaho, we would go straight to Idaho. What comes up? We now start here on the spatial mapping side, and we're going to walk through that in a minute. But let me also mention one other thing. Down here on the left-hand side, there's a download Idaho conversion summary, and that will give you a nice two-pager with a lovely map. It's a map that can be used in publications, or we can get you a different version. So there's a lot of information that you can use for your work and further outreach to partners and members, etc. So starting with this map, this is the land cover and use map. You will see that we have mapped many different things, and on here we will come back to it that will look at conversion and the type of things that you can see with conversion. We have included federal grazing land as part of our study, and that you can see also on other slides as well. But here's a sort of summary of some of the acreage of the land use and cover data. Now let's look at the next piece, which is productivity, versatility, and resiliency. This is a new index that we created, and my apologies, I hit the wrong, let's get back to Idaho. I'm sorry, I feel sometimes like a cruise director and I sometimes hit the wrong button. But the productivity, versatility, and resiliency index is a first ever assessment of agricultural land quality that specifically accounts for productivity, versatility, and resiliency. It was developed with a national panel of experts. And the higher the PVR value indicates the higher the suitability of that land for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. We did this in part because we at AFT wanted to understand the type of agricultural land that was being lost, not just the extent of it. And while at AFT, we have consistently over our history said that every acre matters, we have done this to say that there is some land, because of its suitability for intensive crop production with few limitations to it, that should have an extra special degree of love and attention from us, that this is land that is particularly important and it deserves us thinking about it slightly differently than less productive land. So we used this PVR index to let me get back up here, to create what we called a definition for nationally significant agricultural land. And essentially this land is the land that is at the top third of the PVR index range. You will see over here on the left that for Idaho, we consider 26% of total agricultural acres in the state to be nationally significant. That's about 3.6 million acres. And not a surprise to any of you probably on this webinar, you see where the most productive land in the state is. So again, that's just another feature that we have done through this mapping process. So then let's go to the last part of the conversion, last part of the spatial data, which is the conversion of agricultural land. And before I start zooming in, let me just talk a little bit about it. We've thought about conversion in two different ways. What we used to do was to look at conversion that was focused simply on urban and high density, highly developed land use. And that has been the traditional culprits of farmland conversion, which is expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas. So this category of development is largely sort of the sprawl coming out from cities and towns, but the category also includes rural, industrial, and energy production sites. So that in this category, if there are significant oil and gas well pads, solar panel installations, they would show up as urban and highly developed land. A new feature in this project is a new type of conversion threat that we have mapped, and that's called low density residential development, or LDR. This was an effort for us to start looking at the amount of land that is being fragmented by farmettes and ranchettes that, as many of us know, are impacting agriculture. It's not to mean that there can't be farming and ranching in and around this development, but it makes it more difficult in many cases. It creates management challenges, dealing with neighbors who may not like odors, may not like noise, many kind of factors. So that is why we were very interested to see how much of this type of development there is. And as you can see by this little statistic here, we looked at what happens to land that is in what we called low density residential development. Because at the start of the period here, and I should have said at the outset that it was 2001 to 2016, which was a time of incredibly low housing starts in most places. I think Idaho is one of those exceptions. But that land that in 2001 was in low density residential development was 122 times more likely to be converted to highly developed by 2016. So what it means to us is that we are seeing in Idaho, particularly, that as towns and cities are moving out, and then even further out, you have this sort of low density, very low sprawl, some of which you don't even see, that starts to get filled in over time, and that means that that land is likely to be converted out of agriculture entirely. So let's just look down here. We talk again at the type of land that has been converted, that the nationally significant land, how much of that has been converted. So all of this information is available for you to look at further. But let me go back, and with Addie's help, we're now going to zoom in, and I think we'll do it with the land cover and use, and look at particular parts of the state. And I just want to say here, in looking at conversion, that that there are a number of states in this report. This was a national report, and we've had states on the East and West Coast, obviously, with long-standing issues around the loss of agricultural land. And what we've seen in this report is that there are a number of states that are now moving up with that threat. They have hotspots. It may not seem overall that it is a concern statewide when you look at the overall numbers, but when you look at the map and we zoom in, that we see that there really are conversion pressures in many parts of the state, and that needs to be thought of both as a sort of local response and thinking about a state response to this threat. So Addie, tell me where you would like me to go here.
Chris, why don't we start by zooming in on the Treasure Valley and looking at what's happening in the Boise area?
Okay, where's my zoom? Okay, all right, here we go. Okay, so here you can see a significant amount. So again, all of this is urban, and this darker sort of burnt orange is moving significantly outwards and around. You can see it all along the edges of what has been sort of newly urbanized. Where next? Any other points to make on this?
Yeah, I think it's important to note and just remind folks that in those orange areas that are the LDR areas, there could still be viable agriculture that's taking place. So we don't want to give the impression that those orange areas have been fully converted out of agriculture, but rather that because they're in these areas of increasing development pressure, that they're much more under threat than those ag areas that are not in LDR.
Right.
And Chris,
yep.
Why don't we go ahead and move east and look at the Magic Valley, and let's start in Twin Falls and then work our way up and look at the Idaho Falls area too.
Oh boy, I'm trying to reduce it. I'm sorry, now here we go. Okay. I'm afraid that I seem to have hit a technological glitch, and I can't seem to zoom in or zoom out without upsetting the apple cart. So we might have to stay right where we are.
So again, here, I think we're seeing really similar patterns. And for many of the people on this call today, these aren't going to be, this isn't an earth-shattering revelation that there is development pressure. But what I think this tool does is it quantifies it and visualizes it in a new way. And I wanted to move east to Idaho Falls, if you can, Chris.
Sorry, I did not mean to hum. I'm going, again, my cursor seems to, I'm going in the right direction, correct?
You're going in the right direction.
My apologies, I really do feel like a cruise director now.
So what I think is really interesting to note when you look at this part of the state is you have really significant swaths of land that are exclusively in LDR. You look up toward Ruby, and places where there really hasn't been a lot of urban development in the last 20 years, but a significant amount of LDR. And what we know is that that's a strong predictor for further urban development in the next 20 years.
Right.
And Chris,
Yep. Go north.
yeah, let's head to the northwest.
All right, you're going to have to direct me again because I've lost my ability to shrink my screen. I'm still.
Keep going. Yep, there you are.
Okay, why is the rest of it not showing up? Well, no, not Montana. Or here we go. Am I in the right? My apologies to everybody. I think maybe what I need to do, let me just go back here. I'm going to have to go out of this for whatever reason. I'm hitting technological problems. Let me go back for a minute and try and shrink this. Or Addie, we just might not be able to do that right now.
Sure. Well, while you're doing that, I think what I wanted to draw attention to is how in northwestern Idaho, the development pressure is to some extent spilling over from the expansion of the Spokane metropolitan area. And in Boise, in the Treasure Valley, we're seeing this development pressure happening across county lines. So there is a real need to think about solutions that are multi-jurisdictional, you have counties that need to work together and states that need to work together to think about how we address these solutions that are bigger than our individual jurisdictions.
Great. Well, my apologies. I can't seem to make my my cursor come back here. Oh, here we go. Let me see. Let me give it one last shot here on the land use cover and go up. We were looking up here, correct?
Yep.
It doesn't want to behave. I'm afraid that's probably as good as I can get on the, I can't get very, I just can't seem to make it zoom for me. So I apologize, everyone. But you can see from this feature that is something that you can go in, you can zoom on as well. So we are going to switch and move over to policy for a minute, and maybe while Addie is talking later on, I can see if I can get the map back up and make it work better. But we're going to stop here for a minute and launch a poll, because we are interested in everyone's perspectives about what you think is going to drive conversion of farm and ranch land in Idaho over the next 20 years, because how that conversion takes place impacts what we think about what is the response and what are the tools both at the local level and at the state level to address some of those conversion threats. So let's pause for a minute. If you can't vote, if you're having a hard time to vote and you can vote for more than one, you may need to you may be in full screen mode and you might need to come out of full screen mode in order to be able to vote. Okay. So, so this is interesting. This is consistent in this state as we've seen in others when we've posed the same question, that people still feel that the top vote getter continues to be more and poorly planned development. But like other places as well, a large number of you feel that generational transfer of land and the vulnerability of land as it is transferring from one generation to the next is a particular challenge. So that is something to keep in mind as we're thinking about the policy scorecard. So let's go in, let's turn to the scorecard. Our intent with this scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address what have been the three main drivers of agricultural land conversion. As we just talked about, poorly planned development, weak ag viability and challenges around profitability, and the fact that land is most vulnerable when it transfers between generations. AFT has been at the forefront of federal and state policy development around farm and rangeland retention and protection since our founding. But this is the first time that we've done a state policy scorecard. And we felt that as we were talking about the level of threat that states face, that we needed to be able to provide ideas around policy responses. And so we recognize that states do many things to support agriculture, that many of the programs and policies are focused particularly on the conversion that's driven by folks not being able to make an effective living in farming or ranching. So that we did not include many of the policies and programs that are focused on agricultural viability broadly. We tried to focus on those that have a direct relationship to the land base. And so you see that the ones that we looked at were these 6 here on the left. The purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs, or PACE programs. They're also known as purchase of development right programs in places. These are programs that landowners, farmers, ranchers, other rural landowners can sell their development rights or sell an agricultural conservation easement. There are tax benefits in many places. There's a federal tax benefit for doing so. There's a federal program, the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, for which that helps to fund purchase of these types of easements. Many states have these programs, 28 states have them. Land use planning and growth management. This again is a type of thinking around states of thinking about land use, and to the states to your west of Oregon and Washington, you all might be quite familiar with some of their approaches around land use planning, but there are many different types of approaches, some where states have specific goals about retaining farmland, some that just have goals of saying we have these following goals, and there's some consistency that counties and localities have to follow to be in sync with state goals. So that's what we looked at there. Property tax relief. Every state has some way of acknowledging that agricultural land and forest land pays less in services, requires less in services than it pays in taxes, and that therefore that tax rate ought to be lower for working lands. But they're all different types of bells and whistles that can be added to a program like that to help support keeping farmland and farming. Then there's agricultural district programs. I'll come back to that a little bit later. There are about 18 states that have those. They're a way of marrying things, some planning, some protection for farmers and ranchers against eminent domain, against annexation. They can have some kinds of tax benefits for farms and ranches. And then the last two were focused on this question of sort of generational transfer and access to land. So farm link programs that there are many private ones, but there are some states that have public programs. These programs are focused on matching those who are seeking land for the intent of farming or ranching with those who are looking for somebody to either sell their farm or ranch to or to lease it to. There are somewhere, I think, around 15 state programs or where there's state support to private programs. And lastly, there is state leasing, and we looked at what states had policies and were being proactive in making state-owned land available to farmers and ranchers. So with that sort of explanation, let me scroll down, and here is the Idaho scores. And I say that again loosely. This was not an intent to really, it was more of an attempt to say, this is what you've got. And here's the sort of range of things that states are doing. As an aside, here's the policy summary over here on the left that you can download, and again, have a nice 2-pager highlight version of this if you want. So down here you can look at, and we're just going to do this for a couple of programs because I want to get to a little bit of a conversation still. Here you see a drop-down menu of things, and we're going to take planning as an example here. And again, planning, it's important to appreciate it, as I suspect many of you do, that planning can both be top-down from the state down and from the locality up. And planning tools, states can play an important role in providing funding for some of those planning tools, providing incentives, but there's a lot that county governments can do on their own. Where Idaho in its planning, where it got a high mark, was because it has a requirement for comprehensive plans on the part of, I assume, of its county government. But what it doesn't have when you look at it is that in some other states there's support for those comprehensive plans. And you will see that in other states, they actually have specific thinking and either a state goal around farmland protection or some amount of support to counties who are trying to do planning proactively around agriculture. So let me go back up and take a look at one other thing, which is the property tax relief. And again, when you come down and you scroll down and you look, and you get to Idaho, which is right in here in the middle, what jumped out at me was this high score for the amount of land that is enrolled in current use or agricultural use assessment for the state, which is important. That's what we want to see because it helps provide more support to the business of farming. What I would just point out is that in some places there are withdrawal penalties. Idaho does not have those. Some states and counties have used withdrawal penalties to, in fact, fund county or state purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs. So I think maybe, Addie, I should stop there and give you a chance to weigh in here on what you're seeing and what you think of these various types of policies and programs.
I think, Chris, what I'll just add, you've done a great job walking through the specifics of the programs that Idaho does currently have in place. And I just want to reiterate that, number one, no state in the country received a perfect score. And the reason for that is that every state is doing something, but all states have room to do a lot more. And what we're trying to do with this report is really offer some ideas and options for how states and local jurisdictions can do more toward protecting their farmland. So while we've chosen for this report to focus on state policy, there are comparable policies and programs at the county level and in some cases the city level for many of these. And so I just wanted to emphasize that there are tools in the toolbox that don't necessarily require engagement at the level of the state, but that there's a lot that can happen on a more local level.
Right,
And,
that's an excellent point, Addie.
so I think I'll stop there. Did you want to say any more about the Idaho programs, Chris?
No, I think what I would just leave with is, again, in thinking for Idaho and the concern that's obviously out there around generational transfer, that thinking about ways of doing that could be enabled at the state level, whether that is support for something like a FarmLink program or other ways of providing some mechanism for helping to match up exiting farmers and ranchers, as we could call them, or seniors, and those who are looking to expand an operation or just starting out, that is extraordinarily helpful. And I think back to, I'm very big on ag districts as a way to be able to target, and ag districts are typically formations that are farmers and ranchers who come together voluntarily. It's an entirely voluntary approach, but if you created an ag district program, that you could provide sort of additional incentives that might be incentives around the transfer of land to a next generation. I think you can think very creatively at both the county and state level on the ag district front as a way of providing a number of supports and thinking about farmland protection within those ag districts as well. So let me stop there. We're going to go out of the website. And as we go out of the website, we are going to launch a poll that is focused on policies. It asks, and this could be true either at the state or county level, which you think would be most valuable to focus on for Idaho. And again, this is not, you can pick multiple answers if you want. And my apologies, I think on the poll that we were not able to put in FarmLink into it because we had a limit of 5 questions. And so we decided to put in the not sure, need more info. But apologies that farm linking is not in there. Okay, great. Again, it's the top 2 are PACE programs and land use planning. So I will say on the purchase of ag conservation easements, and I know that many of the land trusts on the call are already working with the federal ACEP program, with the new funding that was put into the 2018 Farm Bill, and with the change to that. I really think that that's an opportunity for farmers and ranchers in Idaho to be thinking about protecting their land, and it provides, because it's a one-to-one match with any state or local dollars, it's a very effective way. It's a good way to pitch to taxpayers in a community that in fact you're leveraging significant other money. So let me move on. One of the things that we were not able to put into the spatial database was a protected agricultural land data layer. And that was because while there is a National Conservation Easement database, it is not focused just on agricultural land. And we wanted to only put in that land that is protected for the purpose of agriculture. So you will see, it's nice to see that there's that green blob of protected land in Idaho. If you were a land trust working in Idaho and we have not gotten the data from you about your protected land, we would love to hear from you. Please put a comment in on the question line, and we will be back in touch to talk more about that. So Addie, let's stop and do a few questions.
Now would be a great time if folks have questions to type those into the question box. And Chris, why don't we start with this one? We've thrown this term around about ag viability and how weakened ag viability is a driver of farmland loss. Can you talk more about what that means and maybe some of the policies that we didn't look at in this study, but that states have used to support ag viability?
Right, that's an excellent question. So when we talk about ag viability, I think that we mean the challenges around the profitability of agriculture have been, have been a challenge for a long time, and we've seen, particularly the past few years, this year particularly, when you've had the combination of the pandemic and coming on the heels of a lot of trade challenges, that has been a point in time where we've seen nationally a lot more farm bankruptcies and a lot more concerns about the ability of farmers and ranchers to stay in business over the long term. And where we see that what that happens is the impact on conversion is that if you are at a tipping point on the business, and particularly where you might be a farmer or a rancher that is close to retirement or wanting to be out of agriculture, that where you have an opportunity to sell a chunk of land for something other than agriculture, it's very tempting to do that because that's in part a way to pay for retirement. And there's many very understandable reasons for why landowners will sell land that then goes out of agriculture. And we're seeing that pressure particularly on the renewable energy side as well. But in terms of what states do, there are a number of states that have loan programs that are focused on infrastructure needs. There are states that have grant programs that are officially called farm viability ones that help farmers deal with sort of reinvestment in agriculture that will allow for a different marketing approach. There are a number of states that provide support for marketing, and I don't know, I apologize for not knowing whether Idaho has a Idaho grown type program that again is providing some kind of marketing support for farmers. So there's a variety of different types of mechanisms that state governments have been using to support the business of farming and ranching.
Great. And I think we have time for one more question. How do the monetary incentives for easements compare to the amount of money farmers can receive if they sell their property? So if easements, as they're currently administered, are they providing enough relative to the value of the land if it gets sold?
So the value of an easement is based on an appraisal. So in theory, what one is offered for an easement is based on what the fair market value of a property is. So that would account for the fact if there is development pressure in a particular area, that the fair market value of the property being considered for protection would be based on that fair market value. Then the second step is to determine what the easement value is, and that easement value can be depends by what uses are restricted, whether there is an allowance for future housing lots. There are many factors that go into what is that value of the easement, but it is based essentially on fair market value, so that in theory, it should be the equivalent to selling land if you were an area where there was development pressure. Now, again, there's all kinds of complications in there, because one, a landowner might think, well, I've been offered X amount for this land, but it doesn't account for all of the development related fees that are associated with it. So it really takes sitting down at a kitchen table with somebody who can walk through all of the factors, and that is something I'll get to the end, that there are many local land trusts who can do this, and American Farmland Trust through our Farmland Information Center is also happy to provide that kind of conversations with landowners.
Great, thanks, Chris. I think in the interest of time, we should move on. We've got a couple more slides, and then we may have time for a few more questions at the end.
Okay, to you, Addie.
Great. So it's clear that time is not on our side when it comes to saving our farm and ranch land. And that's why, as part of the release of Farms Under Threat, AFT has announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day, which is what it has been in the last 2 decades, down to 500 acres a day by 2040. Next slide. So AFT is strengthening our commitment to farmland protection in a number of different ways. As Chris mentioned, we are establishing the National Agricultural Land Network. And in Idaho in particular, we're hoping to leverage the network to provide capacity building and peer-to-peer learning for organizations who already are or who want to be taking an active role in protecting farmland. Number 2, we're providing new leadership in key locations, and that includes Idaho. We are actively fundraising to be able to put a staff person on the ground to lead these efforts. Number 3, protecting more farmland ourselves and with partners. In Idaho, we're really hoping to partner with other land trusts that want help with complex projects. And we also hope to expand the reach of our Farm Legacy program, which works to keep land in farming as it transitions to the next generation. Number 4, advocating for stronger state and federal policies. I think it's clear that enacting farmland protection policy at any level really requires a broad bipartisan coalition and active community engagement. And in Idaho, our first priority is helping to build community awareness about the issue, laying that foundation of community support that will be essential to any kind of future policy action. And lastly, promoting research-based decision-making. We plan to use the findings from Farms Under Threat to guide our activities on the ground, and we are on the lookout for opportunities to build on this research and learn more about what's happening with farmland on a local level. Many of you may be thinking, how can communities do more to respond to these issues? And AFT has offered these 5 general recommendations. Number 1, analyzing and mapping trends and conditions. We can't respond to the problem if we don't know where it's happening. Number 2, strengthening or adopting a coordinated suite of policies, and we've offered some ideas and options here today. Number 3, supporting farm viability and access to land. 4, planning for agriculture, not just around it. Chris talked a little bit earlier about land use planning programs and the opportunity to plan specifically about farmland. And number 5 is save the best. That's where those PVR values come in handy, but don't forget the rest, because it's all important. And one of the things that I think Chris will talk a little bit about is just how with the National Ag Land Network, we hope to be able to support local organizations to do some of these activities. Chris, I'll pass it back to you.
Great, thank you. But before we do that, let's take a few minutes, because we have a few minutes where we can do some more questions. So let me pose one, Addie, to you. What about emerging urban ag strategies, micro farming, personal gardens, etc.? Are these part of the solution?
I think urban agriculture is absolutely part of the solution when you think about the broader issue of food security. And I think as the COVID-19 pandemic has illustrated, our global food chains are very fragile and very sensitive to any kind of disruption. For the first time in our lives, for many of us, we're seeing empty grocery store shelves. So in that context, urban agriculture absolutely has a role to play in ensuring that communities have access to fresh local produce. I think that when we talk about large scale production, certainly there are solutions around some of the vertical farming and indoor farming strategies that have been developed in cities around the country. But I think we also have to consider the viability piece when we're talking about how, especially in Idaho, agriculture is an essential part of the economy and the jobs in Idaho. And so we don't see as much of that being contributed from the urban agriculture side. So it's a balancing act.
Okay, great, thank you. Let me ask, we're going to try and squeeze 2 more questions in here. Beyond land trusts, what partners do you collaborate with, or do you want to collaborate with, to protect farmland and working landscapes?
Chris, I'll let you answer that one. You can talk about what we're doing in other parts of the country.
Well, I can certainly do that, and maybe what a part of it revolves around the National Agricultural Land Network. So let me save a piece of it. But in terms of where with whom we collaborate, obviously part of this effort was intended to be state focused, and so our aim with this work is to collaborate with those who are involved engaging state policymakers. So that would be farm and conservation orgs of all kind that are engaged in sort of policy thinking. But then there's the whole community, and this does get to the network of the county planners and those who are engaged really in thinking about land use planning and land use opportunities. And that's where I think the network will be more helpful. And then lastly, we have been doing a lot of work with around land access. We have a cohort of land access trainers that we have been training to do work with beginning farmers and ranchers, and that's a whole new area. We also have been working a lot with soil, not so much in Idaho, but in other parts of the country. We are focused on doing a lot of work around soil health and in looking at some of the economic benefits of soil health. So that has involved a whole different type of community of organizations and entities that we work with, so that are particularly focused on the conservation practice side of things. but I'll get back to that a little bit in the network. So the last one I just wanted to pose is, what policies, programs help keep the next generation on the land, especially if farming is less lucrative and mom and dad need to retire? So e.g., next generation has to buy the land and equipment, which can be very expensive. So that is a very good question. It is one of the reasons why we believe that the purchase of agricultural conservation easements are an incredibly useful generational transfer tool, because they enable that senior generation to get some of the equity out of the land that they need to be able to retire and or to be able to facilitate that transfer of the land to, for instance, if you've got a few kids and only one wants to stay on the land, it sometimes gets complicated trying to figure out that generational transfer. So having that funding that comes from that sale of an agricultural conservation easement has been hugely beneficial. But we have been thinking a lot about other policy needs. Some of these are federal, some are other states. Some states have created beginning farmer tax credits that provide a tax credit to a farmer or rancher who wants to sell or lease their land to a beginning farmer. And we have been talking about a capital gains exclusion on the sale of land. It's the capital gains tax is one of the reasons why a lot of older landowners don't sell their land, even if they don't have a child that wants to be on the farm, because they take a pretty significant capital gains hit. And so we would like to see a federal exclusion on that gain if it's the sale of land to a young farmer. So those are some of our thoughts about that particular question. So we, I think, are very close to being out of time. So let me launch our last question here, because this goes to, this is our last poll question, which goes to, what kind of technical support and information can American Farmland Trust provide? And I'm just going to go ahead and talk for a minute while this poll is open, to talk a little bit about the Farmland Information Center and the National Agricultural Land Network. The Farmland Information Center is a clearinghouse that we run in collaboration with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service. It is a answering service. It is focused both for policymakers, for practitioners who are working on agricultural land planning or land protection, and it's also for landowners. So for instance, if you know a farmer or rancher who is interested in participating in the agricultural conservation easement program at the federal level, we have resources on the website that is available to them. We have, if you were looking for a land trust and who you might work with if you were interested in protecting your land, you could go to the Farmland Information Center. It's got a wonderful resources around census of ag information, around generational transfer, many statistics. It's a wonderful resource. I encourage people to use it. The National Agricultural Land Network is, and I'm just looking here now at the poll results, and the interest in trainings and information around agricultural conservation easements, assistance around local ag protection programs. This is very helpful for us, because what it means is that the network is formalizing what AFT has done since our founding, which is to provide technical support to those who are engaged in doing agricultural land protection and thinking about planning for agriculture to keep land in farming and ranching. What we want to do is to have the network, which was just recently launched, but to be both something that can have virtual national conversations around particular topics, but to also focus on more regionalized and state-based conversations. So Addie and I will take these thinkings around what is most important and think about how the network can serve the community of folks in Idaho who want more of this technical information, because it's something that we are looking forward to doing more of. We see this as a need, excuse me. And so I will finish with saying that the Agricultural Land Network is free. We do have members as a way of being able to get people to sign up. So if you belong to a land trust, or if you are a county planner, or you are a farm or conservation organization, we would welcome you. You can see the website there. You're welcome to give me a call or send me an email if you want more information. So I encourage people to sign up for the network. It's a way for us to further engage with you and help get the kind of information that we hope you'll find useful. And so let me just turn back to Addie for any last thoughts or comments, or Sean, to you for that matter.
I want to thank everyone one more time for being here today to be part of this conversation. And I wanted to acknowledge that there were a number of questions that we were not able to get to, and I apologize for that. But one of the things that we are working on is compiling a frequently asked questions document from all of the state webinars that we're offering, and we'll make that available on the Farms Under Threat website.
Great, and this is Sean. I just want to thank everybody here in Idaho who is working on these issues. We care very much about our state and about the future, and frankly, the legacy of agriculture that's been so important to who we are. So thanks for being on the call today.
Take care.